Bloomberg News had a great article that compared Alberta's Heritage Fund to Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund. These are two government-created funds to retain a proportion of resource wealth created today for future generations. The article is titled "A $433 Billion Missed Opportunity Haunts Canada's Oil Heartland." Quoting from the article, "Back in 1976, Alberta's government established a special fund to save some of its oil and gas revenue for leaner times when prices dropped or resources ran dry. For decades, royalties poured into Alberta's coffers, with the gusher accelerating in the boom of the early 2000s, as the province developed its vast oil sands reserves, the world's third largest oil resource. But successive governments failed to stick to the savings plan. Today, as weak oil prices upend economies around the world, Alberta is confronting its own painful regrets. Had it set aside more during the oil's boom, Alberta could have had a $575 billion Canadian dollars wealth fund to cushion the blows of COVID-19, according to one economist's estimates. Instead, the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund is down to just $16.3 billion, after losing $1.9 billion because of the pandemic and a wrong-way bet against market volatility. That's not enough to provide much help in a province suffering from Canada's second highest unemployment rate at 15.5%, a failing credit rating, and a dark period ahead for its most important industry." The article then goes on to compare the very modest Alberta Heritage Fund to Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, modeled on the former, but not nearly as successful. Quoting again from the piece, "Toombs estimates that the Heritage Fund could have been worth $575 billion Canadian, uses the fund's actual investment returns, but assumes that the province had followed the practices similar to those that helped Norway amass its $1.12 trillion government pension fund, Global. Those guidelines include contributing all of its resource revenue to the fund and withdrawing only 4% a year. Norway plans to exceed that cap this year, withdrawing about 4.2% of the fund, or roughly $37 billion to shore up its budget." So let's get more into what happened to cause the Norway Fund to become a behemoth valued at more than $1.1 trillion, while the Alberta Heritage Fund has only been able to amass less than half of the 4% dividend the Norwegian government plans to withdraw from its fund this year. So initially, the Heritage Fund grew exponentially with an annual investment of about 30% of provincial revenues for its first decade. However, in 1987, Premier Don Getty ended the regular transfers, which leveled off its growth. Royalties that would have gone to the fund for future generations were instead used to help more immediate wants of government, including program spending, tax cuts, and corporate giveaways by successive governments. Although modeled on the original intent of the Alberta Heritage Fund, Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund has ensured its wealth has been saved for its purpose. Today, through its restraint and long-term vision, the fund is now estimated to be worth over $1.1 trillion, and according to the New York Times, holds 1.5% of globally listed stocks. The fund has also enacted ethical guidelines set by Parliament. Ironically, these guidelines has caused the fund to divest from major producers of the Alberta tar sands. The New York Times recently reported that Cenovus Energy, Suncor Energy, Canadian Natural Resources, and Imperial Oil will be barred from investments from the fund for, quote, "acts or emissions that on an aggregate company level lead to unacceptable greenhouse gas emissions," end quote. I think it's clear that the economics of the oil sand don't make much sense anymore, especially given that the IMF is actually projecting that oil demand will shrink by 8% alone this year, and at the same time that that the cost of extraction was already driving away investment from oil sands projects. Unfortunately for Alberta, it doesn't have the massive reserves it could have potentially amassed during the boom years of its oil industry to stimulate and diversify its economy now. Nevertheless, stimulating new industries that expand and diversify its economy is what the Alberta government needs to do. But instead of addressing these realities, the government is so dogmatically in favor of promoting oil sands resurgence that even the ultra-right-wing UCP leader Jason Kenney openly mused about this past February about government entry as a significant player in the industry. And unfortunately, the Alberta government has found an ally in promoting the industry with Justin Trudeau's Liberals, who recently struck a deal to relax regulations that monitor oil producers and their downstream effects. This deal comes after Trudeau's Liberals have already nationalized the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which they're twinning, and gave a massive bailout to oil producers to clean up their orphan wells in the spring. Trying to reinvent the past is a fool's errand that doesn't seize on developing the opportunities of the 21st century. Alberta has a vast wealth in terms of its capacity to develop renewable sources of energy. Real progressives need to better articulate to workers who can't see a future outside of the industry that has provided steady, well-paying work that there can be a better future. But to inspire these workers, they have to see real material benefits, not ephemeral promises of retraining that don't secure a livelihood. Unless we articulate a bold and transformational plan that rapidly decarbonizes the economy and offers actual material benefit to workers in new renewable industries, we will fall victim to the endless centrist and conservative attempts to appease a dying industry that threatens our planet. Please like and subscribe, and I welcome respectful debate in the comments below.